Across this small corner of New England, villages have been swallowed whole by reservoirs. Mill towns have burned not once but twice. Forests hum with the silence hikers swear is unnatural, and lakes hide entire main streets under 60 feet of cold, unmoving water. These are not tourist attractions with costumed actors or curated ghost tours. These are real communities that suffered real tragedies, built real folklore out of real loss, and then slipped off the map because nobody could bear to live there anymore. So today, let's take a quiet drive into the parts of Connecticut your realtor conveniently forgets to mention. This is Top 10 Creepiest and Most Remote Towns in Connecticut. The places you should never hike alone, never wander after dark, and definitely never try to live in unless you enjoy being on a first-name basis with the local search and rescue team. Number 10, Pleasure Beach. Pleasure Beach is one of those places that older Connecticut locals talk about with the same soft nostalgia they reserve for old diners and childhood summers. Back in the 1890s, this little strip of sand was buzzing with life. Families poured in for boardwalk snacks, carousel rides, and live music drifting out over the water. It was the kind of place where kids begged to stay for one more hour, and grown-ups secretly wanted the same. For decades, people called it the Coney Island of Connecticut, and honestly, it earned the name. But that bright, noisy picture is only the surface. The real story turns dark, and it turns fast. The first fire in 1953 burned through enough of the amusement park to make everyone nervous, but when the second fire hit in 1973, it erased everything that was left. The bridge that once carried laughing visitors across the water collapsed into a burned, twisted skeleton. The rides were reduced to metal ribs. The bathhouses stood empty like abandoned shells. The whole island fell silent in a way that didn't feel natural. That's when people stopped talking about summers and started talking about how a place can forget it ever had a pulse. Visitors who take the ferry today often describe the same feeling. Quiet, too quiet, the kind that presses against your ears. No hum of machines, no footsteps on the boardwalk. Only wind slipping through empty door frames like it's searching for someone who never came back. And just when you think that's as eerie as it gets, the stories start pouring in. Some locals talk about music drifting across the water on foggy nights, a light echo of carnival tunes that shouldn't exist anymore. Others swear they've heard laughter carried on the wind, not joyful but thin and distant, like a recording that refuses to stop playing even though the machine melted away 50 years ago. Maybe it's imagination, or maybe certain places hold on to noise the way others hold on to scent. But that's only half the truth. What really unsettles people isn't what they hear, but what they don't. Pleasure Beach feels like a party everyone left in a hurry and never cleaned up after, a dream that never fully woke up, a reminder that even joy can rot if no one visits it long enough. So here's the real question. Would you walk through a burned carnival alone at dusk? The ferry ticket may be cheap, but your nerves will pay full price. The second your footsteps start echoing where thousands once stood. And if you think an abandoned theme park is unsettling, number 9 comes with earthquakes you can actually hear. Number 9, Moodus looks like the kind of gentle New England village where you might stop for a sandwich and a quiet walk. The streets feel small in a comforting way, the homes sit close to the trees as if they've known each other for generations, and the nearby Moodus State Park offers the kind of calm that weekend hikers brag about on social media. It's the sort of place where you'd expect a soft breeze, birdsong, maybe the hum of a lawnmower somewhere in the distance. In other words, nothing worth raising an eyebrow over. At least that's the impression, until the ground starts talking back. Because Moodus holds a secret most postcards would never dare mention. This little town is the birthplace of the infamous Moodus noises, a series of deep, sudden underground booms recorded since colonial times. The local Wangunk people believed the sounds were the anger of Hobomok, a powerful spirit beating the earth from below. Early settlers wrote about windows rattling and livestock panicking for no visible reason. You could stand under a clear blue sky, not a storm cloud in sight, and still hear an explosion rip through the quiet like a cannon. Even today, the USGS classifies the area as a hotspot for micro-earthquake swarms. These aren't dramatic enough to topple houses, but they're strong enough to shake your nerves, especially when they show up at 2 in the morning without warning. People who grow up here describe the noise with a shrug, like it's just another part of life. Sounds like God dropped something heavy, one old-timer once said. But here's where the story pivots. It's not just the booms themselves that unsettle outsiders, it's what they inspired. H.P. Lovecraft used Moodus as creative fuel for the Dunwich Horror, one of his most disturbing tales. When a horror writer who spent his career imagining cosmic nightmares chooses your town as the spark behind a story, that alone tells you something. Suddenly, the pleasant park trails and tidy houses don't feel so harmless. The ground under your feet becomes a thin lid sitting on something restless, something whispering, something tapping to be remembered. And that's when people realize Moodus isn't just a quiet village with a weird geological quirk. It's a place where nature occasionally reminds humans that we're not the ones in charge. So the real question is simple. If your idea of a peaceful weekend includes random explosions at 2 in the morning, Moodus has everything you need. Just don't expect your nerves to stay as calm as the scenery claims to be. But explosions are nothing compared to what happens when an entire village vanishes underwater, and that's exactly where our next destination takes us. Number 8. Dantown. Dantown was once the kind of modest, hard-working settlement that never asked for much attention. A cluster of farms, a few workshops, small merchants who knew every customer by name. People wove baskets, traded produce, and lived the kind of life that never made the newspapers but quietly held a community together. It was ordinary in the way only stable, steady places can be, and maybe that's why it never saw its end coming. Because in 1923, Stamford decided it needed a reservoir, a big one, a project meant to secure clean water for a fast-growing city just a few miles south. And somewhere in those plans, someone drew a neat blue shape where Dantown happened to be. The math was simple. The city needed water, the village was in the way. By the time the Laurel Reservoir was finished, Dantown wasn't just gone. It was erased, drowned, sealed beneath a surface so still it almost feels disrespectful. No monument, no plaque, no ceremony. Just an entire community quietly removed from the map so another city could grow a little faster. This is where the story begins to feel unsettling. On calm days, boaters talk about how the water goes strangely silent in the middle of the reservoir, as if the lake is thinking. Some swear the temperature drops just a little when they drift across the exact stretch where the old Main Street once ran. And every so often, a diver reports seeing something down there. Nothing dramatic, nothing ghostly. Just the kind of detail that sticks with you longer than it should. A line of stones that used to be a foundation. A patch of flat earth that looks too deliberate to be natural. A short wall, half buried in silt, standing at an angle as if still waiting for someone to come home. These fragments don't scream for attention. They whisper, which somehow makes them worse. And here's the pivot, the part that gnaws at people who learn the history. A drowned town isn't just a geographic fact, it's an uncomfortable reminder of how easily progress can demand a sacrifice. Dantown didn't die of flood or famine or neglect. It died because someone decided modern life needed water more than a small community needed to exist. It's the kind of moral trade-off that the American century was built on, the kind that looks efficient on paper and tragic everywhere else. So let me ask the question no tourist brochure ever will. Would you swim above a forgotten Main Street? Some people do, right up until the moment they find out what lies beneath them. The truth tends to hit harder than the water ever could. But if one drowned town isn't enough to unsettle you, number 7 doubles down on the nightmare. Number 7, Jerusalem Candlewood Lake looks perfect from a distance. The water is calm, the houses that circle the shore look polished and expensive, and on summer weekends, the lake fills with sleek boats carving white trails across the surface. If you didn't know any better, you'd assume this is just another New England paradise, the kind of place where couples plan engagement photos and retirees daydream about buying a lakeside cabin. But that beauty is only a mask, a thin layer of tranquility floating above a story most people never bother to ask about. because between 1926 and 1928, before the lake existed, there was a village here, a real one. Jerusalem sat in the valley where Candlewood now sparkles, home to around 35 families whose lives were as ordinary and rooted as any small American town. They had farms, narrow dirt lanes, wooden fences, a schoolhouse, and a cemetery where generations rested under the same patch of sky. But when the power company and the state pushed forward with plans to flood the valley for hydroelectric energy, the village's fate was sealed. Families were told to pack up, homes were emptied, livestock sold, headstones moved, at least officially. And then the water came, rising slowly at first, then swallowing everything until the entire community sat under 60 feet of cold, dark lake water. This is where the story starts to pull at people's nerves because Candlewood's silence has never been entirely silent. Locals whisper about the days when the water level drops and the lake seems to groan, a long, low sound that echoes in the coves. Some swear they've heard crying, thin, distant, almost like a wind-blown echo, right as the shoreline exposes bits of old foundations. Divers talk about things that should not exist underwater. A line of stones too neat to be natural, the square outline of a cellar hole, a mossy fence post still stubbornly standing. There are even tales of faint lights flickering near the bottom, not bright enough to be a boat, not natural enough to be dismissed. Whether it's trapped air, reflective minerals, or something else entirely depends on who's telling the story. The lake keeps its secrets well. And here's the pivot, the moment where the picturesque postcard bends into something darker. Candlewood Lake is more than a pretty landmark. It is a burial shroud for an entire way of life, a physical reminder of the trade-offs New England made in the name of progress. Behind every clean kilowatt of hydroelectric power was a village that had to stop existing. Behind every million-dollar shoreline home lies a history most homeowners never learn and maybe never want to. So before you start planning that romantic lakeside cabin, ask yourself how you feel about sleeping above a town that didn't drown by accident, but by design. Because number 6 isn't underwater, but what happened there might make you wish it were. Number 6. Fluteville, and Campville once felt like the kind of peaceful valley towns New England loves to brag about. Quiet roads winding between old white farmhouses, families who made musical instruments by hand, and a landscape so gentle that visitors swore the place cured stress better than any doctor. It looked steady, rooted, almost too steady to imagine anything ever disturbing it. But that sense of safety was an illusion waiting for the right storm. In the summer of 1955, the right storm arrived. When Hurricanes Connie and Diane tore across Connecticut just days apart, they didn't just bring rain, they brought destruction powerful enough to rewrite geography. The rivers swelled into brown, violent walls of water that ripped through the Naugatuck Valley, smashing bridges, lifting homes off their foundations, and grinding entire streets into splinters. By the time the storms passed, Fluteville and Campville were no longer towns. They were debris fields scattered across a valley that no longer recognized itself. And this is where the story tightens because the tragedies of that summer weren't the final blow. They were only the setup. In the aftermath, the Army Corps of Engineers moved quickly, determined to prevent a disaster like that from ever happening again. The solution was Thomaston Dam, a massive flood control project designed to swallow the valley whenever heavy rains threatened. Good for public safety, terrible for the people who once called this place home. Entire neighborhoods were condemned, families were relocated. Whatever remained of the two towns disappeared quietly under the mandate of progress. No formal funerals, no memorial markers, no attempt to preserve the past. The valley simply shifted from being lived in to being regulated. But the land hasn't forgotten. When the water recedes in dry seasons, the valley exposes what the flood tried to erase. Old stone bridges reappear like ribs of some ancient skeleton. Dirt roads emerge, curving toward destinations that no longer exist. House foundations jut out of the soil in crooked squares, their outlines too deliberate to be mistaken for nature. Locals call this place the Ghost Valley, not because anyone believes in literal spirits, but because no one can tell you exactly which family lived where. Memory itself washed away with the storms, leaving behind shapes without names. And here comes the pivot, the part that lingers in the mind long after the hike ends. This valley is nature's reminder that the land was never truly ours to begin with. Every trail, every broken wall, every exposed stone seems to whisper the same cold message. I own this valley. I decide who stays. So if the idea of walking through the skeleton of a neighborhood excites rather than frightens you, these trails will suit you perfectly. Just be prepared for the feeling that you're stepping across the borders of a community that didn't simply move away. It was erased. Next town shifts from water to pure silence, and that silence is far heavier than you might expect. Number 5. Little Genesee Settlement. Little Genesee looks harmless on a map, just a name tucked inside a patch of green forest, the kind of place hikers assume will be peaceful and lightly photogenic. The trails are soft underfoot, the moss-covered stone walls look older than memory. And from the outside, it feels like the sort of historic settlement that simply faded away with time. If you didn't know better, you'd think the quiet was a blessing. But Little Genesee's quiet is not the kind that comforts you. It's the kind that makes you wonder who or what is listening. The settlement began disappearing between the 1850s and 1870s, abandoned so slowly and so quietly that even historians can't fully agree on why families left. What they do agree on is what remains. If you wander far enough into the woods, the past starts pushing through the soil. The squared outline of old house foundations, wells that gape open like dark mouths, and long lines of stone walls that stretch with no explanation, as if they're marking boundaries no one remembers. There is no signage, no plaques, no historical markers, just the sense that the forest has been rearranging itself around the bones of a town that surrendered without a fight. And here is where the atmosphere turns unsettling, because hikers keep describing the same thing without knowing each other. They say the silence here feels different. Not peaceful, not natural, different. Birds fall quiet. Wind doesn't move the branches. Even footsteps sound wrong. Too crisp, too loud, echoing in ways they shouldn't in an open forest. One hiker said the air got colder, like walking into a room you weren't supposed to enter. And another swore the forest sounded hollow, as if every tree had stepped back to watch. It's the kind of silence that doesn't let you settle into it. It holds you at the edge, like you're trespassing in a life someone didn't finish living. The pivot comes when you realize that Little Genesee is more than a forgotten settlement. It's a reminder of a fear that runs deep in American working culture, the fear of laboring all your life only to leave behind nothing the world remembers. These stone foundations aren't ruins. They're the fingerprints of people who built, farmed, fought the seasons, and still vanished so completely that only the cold air seems to acknowledge them now. The forest hasn't forgotten. It remembers everything. Humans are the ones who moved on. So here's the question you probably won't see on a tourist brochure. Are you comfortable hiking through a forest that feels like it remembers you? Some people shrug it off. Others turn back before they reach the foundations. But silence, as disturbing as it is here, is nothing compared to what waits in number 4. A full Victorian ghost village that didn't just fall quiet, it froze in place. Number 4. Johnsonville Village. Johnsonville Village is one of those places that tricks you at first glance. You turn the corner and see a picture-perfect Victorian house glowing white against the tree line, a covered bridge that looks borrowed from a postcard, and a tidy green lawn that seems almost too polite for rural Connecticut. It looks like the kind of historic industrial village teachers love showing in classroom slides, the kind built on twine mills and quiet 19th century ambition. For a moment, you might even think someone still lives here, polishing the porch railings and tending to the grass. But that moment never lasts long, because once you step closer, the illusion cracks. Johnsonville has been abandoned since the late 1980s, and every attempt to resurrect it, every redevelopment plan, every private investment, every breathless promise of bringing it back to life has collapsed into nothing. Investors came and went, proposals made headlines and then vanished. The village sits untouched, as if holding its breath, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to try again. The buildings aren't ruined. That's what makes it worse. They're intact, unnaturally intact. Too clean for a dead town, too silent for a living one. Urbex explorers describe the atmosphere inside the old mill as wrong. Their word, not mine. Footsteps echo in strange ways, bouncing off the walls like the building is bigger on the inside than the outside. Microphones pick up faint metallic reverberations even when no one is moving. One explorer said the windows of the white Victorian looked like empty eyes, reflecting nothing, swallowing light instead of throwing it back. And when the wind shifts, the entire village seems to exhale, making the porch beams creak just enough to sound like a whisper. It's not theatrical. It's not dramatic. It's the kind of subtle unease that slides under your skin and stays there. The pivot comes when you realize why this place unsettles people so deeply. Most abandoned towns look like they've earned their decay. Johnsonville doesn't. It looks staged, like a film set left behind after the director walked off and every actor quit at the same time. The houses stand at attention, the bridge waits for footsteps that never come, the little mill sits idle but unbroken. Everything is preserved just enough to trick the brain into expecting life. And when that life doesn't appear, something in your mind pulls back, instinctively wary, unsure what's missing but certain something is. So before you start dreaming about scooping up a cheap Victorian at auction, ask yourself why every buyer who tried ended up leaving empty-handed. Johnsonville's beauty isn't the problem. Its beauty is the warning. Now let's step into a ghost town that's actually open to the public, and somehow even stranger. Number 3. Gay City. Gay City looks like the sort of state park families dream about. Calm water, gentle forest trails, and a lakeshore that seems designed for picnics and lazy summer afternoons. If you only stay near the parking lot, you'd swear this place is nothing but peaceful. But Gay City has two faces, and the deeper you walk into the woods, the quicker the pleasant one falls away. Because before it was a park, Gay City was a mill village that burned twice. The first fire struck in the 1830s, gutting the early factories. The second came after the Civil War, reducing the paper mill to a hollow shell and breaking what little hope remained for the people who lived here. Families drifted off, houses collapsed under weather and time, and by the late 1800s, the village was dead. The forest didn't just reclaim it, it swallowed it. Today, you can still see the bones of that vanished town if you know where to look. Foundation stones jut out of the earth like old vertebrae. A lone chimney stands crooked and stubborn, pointing toward a sky that no longer remembers the smoke it once carried. Stone walls appear and vanish between the trees, marking boundaries that don't make sense anymore. And the air, people always mention the air. It gets damp without warning, colder in patches, heavy with the faint scent of old burned wood, as though the fires never fully stopped smoldering. Hikers who wander too far off the main path often report the same unsettling details. Strange lights flickering between the trees, too white to be fireflies and too steady to be reflections. Footsteps pacing behind them on leaf-covered ground, even when no one else is around. One man said it sounded like somebody walking in circles, trying to finish a job they started. Another insisted the forest felt aware, not haunted exactly, but watching, waiting. Even the sound of water dripping onto stone carries a strange rhythm, like the village is exhaling through what's left of its ruins. And here comes the pivot, the part that catches people off guard. New England is littered with the remains of dead mill towns. Most lie quiet, resigned to the past. Gay City, by contrast, feels like it knows it died and resents the interruption. This isn't just decay, it's a mood, a presence, something in the landscape that tightens around you the deeper you go. The ruins don't feel forgotten, they feel defensive. So if you insist on visiting, stay on the marked trail. The forest darkens faster here than anywhere else in the park, and once the shadows settle in, the ruins lose what little patience they have left for visitors. But even this darkness is child's play compared to the next place on our list, Connecticut's most cursed forest, where the shadows don't just gather, they linger. Number 2, Bara-Hack. Bara-Hack begins the way many old New England settlements do, with a quiet stream, a moss-soft cemetery, and the faint outline of Welsh immigrant history. If you visit in daylight, it almost feels sweet, tucked inside the folds of the Pomfret woods like a forgotten postcard. For a moment, you might think the place is only old, nothing more sinister than a few toppled stones and a rusting gate. But that is the last moment you will feel entirely comfortable here, because Bara-Hack is famous for one thing above all else: the voices. Stories of disembodied whispers have circulated since the 19th century. Travelers swore they heard laughter when no children were present, the high, quick giggles of a game played just out of sight. Others reported the unmistakable sound of a harmonica drifting through the trees with no player to be found. These weren't isolated accounts from the overly imaginative. They were repeated by farmers, ministers, stagecoach drivers, ordinary people who had no reason to invent anything, and the whispers weren't always friendly. Some described them as urgent, like someone trying to speak through layers of water. Others said the voices seemed amused, as though they were watching something the living couldn't see. Atlas Obscura has documented the local tale of the ghost baby, a legend that unsettles visitors even before they arrive. No one agrees on the exact origin. Some say it was a child who died on the journey from Wales. Others claim the baby lived only a few days in the settlement, but nearly everyone agrees on the eerie echo that still hangs in the air. People say they hear soft crying near the cemetery, subtle enough to question whether it's real, persistent enough to make them leave early. The ruins themselves don't help. Bara-Hack has no houses left standing, not even the ghost of a roofline. The forest has erased all vertical memory, leaving only collapsed stone walls that lace the ground like broken circuitry. Roots wrap around gravestones, lifting them at odd angles as if trying to read the names. When you stand there, you don't feel alone, and not in the comforting way. There's a sensation that the moment you're in isn't quite yours, like you've stepped into a slice of time that continued existing long after the people were gone. And this is where the pivot hits. The fear that humans carry isn't of darkness or death, it's of places where no one lives anymore, yet no one has fully left. So here's the question people avoid asking out loud. Would you stay here after sunset? Even the locals won't. The woods close in fast, the air cools quicker than it should, and the voices, whatever they are, carry farther in the dark. And finally, if ghostly voices already crawl under your skin, wait until you meet number 1. It doesn't whisper, it watches. Number 1, Dudleytown. Dudleytown sits deep inside the Litchfield Hills, a place that should feel like any other patch of New England forest, quiet, green, and almost painfully picturesque. In the daylight, the trees seem harmless, the slopes roll gently, and if you didn't know the name, you'd assume this was just another colonial settlement that lived its life in the 1740s and faded peacefully. But Dudleytown is not peaceful, and it never faded. It collapsed, it twisted, it rotted into something that feels like it shouldn't be here at all. People call it the Village of the Damned, and for once, the dramatic nickname isn't an exaggeration. Ghost hunters Ed and Lorraine Warren investigated this place decades ago, but the stories didn't begin with them. They only amplified what locals had whispered for generations. The moment people step into the tree line, they describe the same thing: an unnatural quiet. Not normal quiet. Not forest settling down for the evening. Quiet. A vacuum. A swallowing. A silence so complete that hikers say their own footsteps sound wrong, as though the ground absorbs the noise before it has time to echo. No birds, no insects, no wind. It feels like the forest is holding its breath, waiting for something that never arrives. The land is closed off now, owned by the Dark Entry Forest Association, with no trespassing signs posted everywhere. Officially, the restrictions are for conservation and safety. Unofficially, visitors tell a different story. Too many people have gotten lost for no clear reason, wandering in circles in a forest that shouldn't be confusing at all. Others talk about shadows slipping between the trees, too tall, too sharp, too deliberate to mistake for a branch. And then there's the emotional hit people mention. A sudden heaviness. A sadness that feels borrowed, like someone else's memory sinking into your chest. It comes without warning and leaves just as strangely. But it never leaves quietly. The pivot arrives when you try to understand why Dudleytown inspires such dread. The legends blame the original Dudley family, suggesting they carried a curse across the Atlantic. Historians shrug and say the land was simply unlucky, farmers failed, livestock died, people went mad or disappeared. Whatever the truth is, the village became a strange cocktail of everything humans instinctively avoid. Bad land, dark forest, generational fear, and a history that refuses to stay buried. Dudleytown exists on maps, but when you're standing in it, your mind struggles to accept that it should exist at all. So here's the real question, the one no ranger will answer and no local will ask. Would you trespass into a forest so silent it erases your footsteps? Some people try once, out of curiosity. Very few ever go back twice. And that, my friends, is Connecticut. Far creepier than the travel brochures suggest. Not every charming New England town hides a happy story. Some bury an entire cemetery beneath a reservoir, others keep centuries of whispers tangled in the trees. And a few don't hide anything at all because everything was burned, flooded, or abandoned long before any of us arrived. So which one shocked you the most? If this opened your eyes or made you double-check your back door, hit subscribe for more deep dive countdowns. America still has plenty of forgotten corners waiting to be uncovered.